Hello friends, I am Professor Filip Kovacevic and this is the 9th edition of the Russian newspaper's Monitor. Before I begin, let me thank you once again for your support and donations on Kickstarter. Thank you for giving us an opportunity to provide you with quality information and analysis on important geopolitical topics that you can't find anywhere else on the net. Thank you also for supporting independent journalism, free of government or corporate agendas. We want to create a global Newsbud community of the people of goodwill, and you are a part of it. Today, we begin as we typically do, with the Rossiyskaya Gazeta, the Russian government-owned newspaper. Remember, the reason we do this is to figure out the general current of the political opinion of the Russian ruling elite. So let's begin, as I said, with the Rossiyskaya Gazeta, the edition for November 29, 2016. There are no international politics news on the front page, which of course is a news in itself. All articles are devoted to the domestic economic issues. It appears that at this time, the Russian government wants to focus the mind of the population on how well it is doing in resolving the problems brought on by the Western economic sanctions. However, on page 2 of the same edition, there is an article dealing with the most important figure of the post-Cold War Russian foreign policy, Yevgeny Primakov. Primakov, who died in June 2015 at the age of 85, is essentially the Russian equivalent of Henry Kissinger. He was a longtime diplomat and scholar who became the director of the Russian External Intelligence Agency, the SVR, in 1991 after the failed coup d'etat by the hardline communists. In 1996, Primakov was appointed the foreign minister of Russia, and in 1998 he became the prime minister. He was a sharp critic of NATO expansion and the hegemonic US role in global affairs. He was one of the first politicians in the world who openly campaigned for the recognition of a new multipolar world. On the day that NATO started the attack on the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia, Primakov was on a plane headed for the visit to the United States. As soon as he found out about the bombing, Primakov ordered the plane be turned around, and he returned to Russia. Many scholars see this symbolic moment as the birth of an independent Russian post-Cold War foreign policy that the President Vladimir Putin later extended and elaborated. The article in question reports that a memorial plaque was unveiled in the center of Moscow commemorating Yevgeny Primakov. The title of the article, "The Man Who Marked the Epoch," is indicative of the tremendous respect that the present Russian government has for Primakov. Below the article, there is a photo of the plaque, and Primakov is described as the man who became a legend. According to the article, the plaque was placed on the building in Moscow where Primakov spent the last years of his life. It is also expected that the monument in his likeness will soon be constructed near the building of the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. The main speech at the unveiling was delivered by Primakov's grandson, whose name is also Yevgeny. He stated that the President Vladimir Putin personally requested that the plaque be created. The sculptor Alexander Rukavishnikov, the creator of the plaque and a well-known Russian sculptor, said that he was inspired by reading Primakov's books on geopolitics and by watching documentary films about him. In recognition of Primakov's contribution to the theory and practice of Russian geopolitics, the plaque portrays Primakov sitting at his desk, deep in thought, surrounded by books and a globe. The plaque was unveiled by the chair of the International Affairs Committee in the Federation Council, which is the upper house of the Russian parliament, Konstantin Kosachev, who said that this is yet another opportunity for the Russian people to bow their heads to Primakov and his great accomplishments in advancing the Russian national interests. The head of the Moscow City Council, Alexei Shaposhnikov, who was also present, commented that Primakov's life is the great example for young generations. In my opinion, this article shows that the current Russian political elite under Putin has already gone a long way in constructing a new post-Soviet narrative for the Russian foreign policy and the role of Russia in global affairs. The respect and recognition given to Primakov and his ideas is a clear indicator that Russia is committing all its economic, military, and intellectual resources in order to establish a multipolar world and make impossible any continuation of the US global hegemony. This process cannot be stopped unless there is a world war. The genie of the global balance of power is out of the box now. The key question is whether the Washington and London foreign policy elites and think tanks will realize this and behave accordingly. The sooner they realize it, the better for all of us and the world in general. Now, let's look at Izvestia, the moderate pro-government newspaper, the edition for November 29, 2016. Just as in the same day edition of Rossiyskaya Gazeta, there are no international politics news on the front page. However, in the middle of page 3, there is an article on the increasing militarization of the Mediterranean. The title is Admiral Kuznetsov, which is the Russian aircraft carrier currently taking part in the military intervention in Syria. So Admiral Kuznetsov will be faced by a humanitarian aircraft carrier. The article talks about the increased investments that the government of Italy is making into its navy, spurred on by the presence of the Russian fleet in the Mediterranean. The article reports that this investment will amount to more than 5.4 billion euros in the next few years. It will include a new aircraft carrier armed with the US-made aircraft of the fifth generation, F-35B, as well as several smaller military ships. The Italian press has given this aircraft carrier an ironic designation, humanitarian, because according to the official reports provided by the Italian Navy, its purchase is justified on the account of the growing possibility of humanitarian catastrophes in the Mediterranean. But why would you need an aircraft carrier to deal with the refugee flow? It is, of course, clear that this is far from being the real reason for obtaining the aircraft carrier, but is only a convenient public relations propaganda ploy. The same was the case when the United States and NATO were claiming that they were installing the missile defense shield in Eastern Europe in order to protect Europe from the potential Iranian missile attacks. Of course, the real reason was the Russian military might. And the same is the case here. The Italian Navy is heavily dominated by the US NATO agents of influence. They see themselves on the front lines of the Atlanticist project in Europe. This is why one cannot stress enough the danger of an open confrontation between the Russian and NATO ships in the Mediterranean, especially now when it seems that the Saudi, Qatar, and the CIA-supported rebels in Syria are being roundly defeated all across the country. The article also reports on the corruption scandal involving the Italian Navy chief, Admiral Giuseppe Di Giorgi, who appears to have lied to the parliament about the amounts needed to provide for the buying of new ships. It also appears that Di Giorgi changed the specifications for the ships, making them more expensive after the reports were approved by the parliament. In addition, the Italian press reported that Di Giorgi had been leading a very luxurious lifestyle, not in line with his government salary or the accepted code of conduct for a military officer. This is far from surprising. High-level NATO officers, especially the Navy officers, have been known for corruption and extremely wasteful lifestyles. Keep in mind that when the United States Admiral James Stavridis was the supreme commander of NATO in Europe, he was also confronted publicly by the allegations of nepotism and corruption and was investigated by the Department of Defense Inspector's General Office. He was not charged, but neither was he promoted after his mandate at NATO ended. Today, Stavridis in the United States, just like Di Giorgi in Italy, has taken the most extreme Russophobic positions. The Russian military expert Mikhail Barabanov, interviewed in the article, stated that investments in the Italian Navy are the second biggest in NATO at this time, and smaller only from the investments by the main purveyor of the Atlanticist project, Great Britain, which is building not one, but two new aircraft carriers. In my opinion, this means that secret NATO plans count precisely on these two navies to confront what NATO considers the Russian threat: Great Britain in the North and Baltic Seas, and Italy in the Mediterranean. It is interesting that neither the Greek nor the Turkish Navy, both NATO member states, are given a more direct role. Perhaps this is yet another sign that the relations within NATO are not as harmonious as NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg likes to make them appear when he comments on NATO activities in public. In fact, in one of my articles for Newsbud, based on the leaked confidential documents of the Montenegrin government, I have shown that there is a rift within NATO regarding further expansion, which is privately admitted even by the high-level officials of the Obama administration. We'll stay with Syria and take a look at the front page of Nezavisimaya Gazeta, the middle-of-the-road newspaper, the edition for November 30th, 2016. On the front page, there is a prominent color photo of the Syrian president Bashar al-Assad. The title of the article is "Bashar Assad is receiving reinforcements. The subtitle explains that the Russian-Syrian coalition could soon be augmented with soldiers from Serbia, China, Egypt, and several former Soviet states. The article claims that the liberation of the northeastern part of Aleppo demonstrates the increasing strength of the Russian-Syrian coalition and that it would not take long for the whole city to be liberated. According to the article, this is likely to lead to the stabilization of the situation in Syria and to some important decisions for the future of the country. The article speculates that Russia might soon propose the establishment of a peacekeeping mission with the soldiers coming from the countries it and Syria consider allies. The sources for the article among the Russian diplomats and military officials claim that these countries are Iran, China, Egypt, Serbia, and some former Soviet republics such as Armenia and Azerbaijan. The article reports that the Russian President Putin on Monday night talked to the Iranian President Hassan Rouhani and that they agreed to continue their close military cooperation in Syria, which they judged as highly successful so far. According to the article, it is no big secret that the victory in Aleppo was achieved by the efforts of the Kurdish and Shiite rebels trained by the Russian and Iranian military instructors. In this respect, the article also noted the importance of the recent phone conversations between Putin and the Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. Based on the Arab media sources, the article claims that Erdogan found himself facing a true dilemma: whether to begin a larger war against the Syrian government, considering that the rebel forces Turkey had supported in Aleppo have been defeated, or to deepen the military cooperation with Russia and place Turkey on the side of the Russian-Syrian coalition. The article claims that in their phone conversations, Putin tried to convince Erdogan to choose cooperation over confrontation. However, the article claims that Erdogan seems not to have decided to do so as yet. For instance, last week, he proposed to the United States, Russia, and other major players involved to create a no-fly zone in northern Syria, which contradicts the goals of the Russian-Syrian coalition. In addition, the Syrian state media reported that the Turkish planes bombed the Syrian territory on November 29. Moreover, there are reports that 4 Turkish F-16 aircraft have begun patrolling the skies near the Syrian town of Al-Bab, where several Turkish soldiers were killed in an air raid by unidentified planes last week. Meanwhile, the Arab media reported that the Syrian army and the Kurdish rebels have been making military gains against the forces of the Free Syrian Army supported by Turkey in northern Syria. There are also reports that the regular Turkish military units are taking part in these battles on the side of the Syrian rebels. The article speculates that due to the strengthening of the Kurdish forces, Turkey might begin a more open offensive against them on the territory of Syria. This would obviously be a problem for the Russian-Syrian coalition and also for the warming up of the Russian-Turkish relations. At the same time, the Egyptian media reported that the Egyptian Air Force is also taking part in the operations in the Russian-Syrian coalition in Syria. The article claims that there are now also Egyptian soldiers on the ground in Syria. The high-level Russian military delegation is meeting with the heads of the Egyptian military in Cairo at this time. Also, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which brings together Russia, China, and several former Central Asian Soviet states, is at this time sponsoring a large-scale anti-terrorist military exercise in the restive Chinese province of Xinjiang. The scenario for this exercise resembles the operations that the Russian-Syrian coalition is conducting in northern Syria. The article reports that the heads of the militaries of the Commonwealth of Independent States, which unites most former Soviet republics, are meeting at the summit in Moscow. One of the questions on the agenda might be the organization of a joint peacekeeping effort in Syria. According to the well-placed Russian sources, as soon as the main forces of Islamic State and the anti-Syrian government rebels are defeated, Russia, with its allies, including China and Iran, plans to organize a wide-scale humanitarian peacekeeping operation on the Syrian territory. In my opinion, this would clearly be yet another blow, not only to NATO and the war party in Washington, D.C., but also to the United Nations, which has been the main organizers of peacekeeping missions since the end of the World War II. This shows that the endgame for Syria is very near, and also that global organizations with universal membership are quickly losing their credibility all across the world because they have proven to be one-sided and unfair in their approach to world's problems. These organizations will have to be rethought and renegotiated very soon. Now, let's take a look at another edition of Nezavisimaya Gazeta, the middle-of-the-road newspaper, the edition for December 1st, 2016. In the lower left corner of the front page, there is an article dealing with the relationship between Russia and Turkey over Syria. The title is "Moscow Gave Erdogan a Chance to Calm Down." The subtitle explains that the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs refused to consider Erdogan's statement on the necessity of Bashar al-Assad's overthrow an authentic quotation. The article reports that Russia decided not to react sharply on the recent statement of the Turkish President Erdogan that the aim of Turkish forces in Syria is the overthrow of Assad's regime. The Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova stated that she believed that Erdogan's statement was the result of incorrect quoting. Zakharova stated that in terms of the Russian relations with Turkey and the Russian involvement in Syria, Russia remained committed to the official agreements made directly with the Turkish leadership. She added that the Russian government did not rely on selective quotations possibly taken out of context, which she believed was the case with Erdogan's controversial statement. The Russian diplomatic sources report that this statement of Erdogan will be one of the topics of discussion at the meeting between the Russian minister Sergei Lavrov and the Turkish foreign minister Mevlut Çavuşoğlu in the Turkish city of Alanya. Putin's press secretary Dmitry Peskov also admitted that this statement stepped out of the officially agreed Russo-Turkish position on Syria. The article quotes the Russian political scientist Alexander Sotnichenko as saying that the statement of Erdogan, which was reportedly a part of his speech at a conference in Istanbul, was not directed against Russia and Syria, but was most likely aimed at pacifying certain powerful domestic forces which invested a lot of money into the financing of the anti-Assad opposition. Sotnichenko also added that another group that Erdogan was aiming at might have been the governments of the Persian Gulf states, such as Saudi Arabia and Qatar, which are extremely unhappy about the close cooperation between Russia and Turkey. In my opinion, the only winning strategy for Syria, for the Middle East, for Europe, and the world in general is cooperation between Russia and Turkey. There are powerful forces against it in the West and also in the Arab world. Those forces organized and attempted the coup against Erdogan in July 2016. Erdogan may still not be out of the danger zone, but in the East, with Russia and China, he would probably find more appreciation and support than in NATO and in the United States. Lastly today, let's go to Pravda, the newspaper of the Communist Party, the largest opposition party in Russia, the edition for November 29, 2016. Across the front page in big bold letters, there is a title that states, Russian communists grieve together with the people of Cuba. The reference, of course, is to the recent death of the longtime leader of Cuba, Fidel Castro. Below the article, there are 3 photos of Castro visiting the premises of the Pravda newspaper during the days of the Soviet Union. One of the photos shows Castro unsmilingly looking into the camera with a portrait of Lenin reading Pravda in the background. The article is actually the statement of the Presidium of the Central Committee of the Communist Party, signed by the Communist Party leader Gennady Zyuganov. In the article, Castro is described as one of the greatest political leaders of the second half of the 20th century and even the first decades of the 21st century. His political path is described in laudatory terms. He is praised for establishing a socialist regime only 90 miles from the citadel of imperialism. His personal qualities, including the strong commitment to the well-being of the Cuban people, are stressed. His links with the Russian October Revolution and his admiration for Lenin are also emphasized. The article calls Cuba the island of liberty and claims that the success of the Cuban Revolution taught the world an important lesson. The lesson that the US imperialism is not omnipotent and that there are ways to resist it and be victorious. According to the article, Cuba became a symbol of a just social system and an inspiration to other revolutionary forces throughout the world, especially in Latin America, Africa, and Asia. The article praises Castro in Cuba for being able to sustain the socialist system even after the collapse of its main ally and donor, the Soviet Union. In fact, the article claims that this is what the Russian communists should learn from the Cubans: how to remain faithful to their political vision and keep fighting for its implementation in practice, even at the time of the global domination of transnational corporate capital. In my opinion, there is nothing surprising in the Communist Party leadership giving so much space on the front page to commemorate the passing of Fidel Castro. What is interesting, however, is their belief that communist political ideology is still meaningful in today's world and the extent to which they continue using the old Soviet phrases and cliches. And so here is an important question. Considering that the Russian communists represent the main and the strongest anti-Putin political force in Russia? Could it be that NATO and the United States demonization of Putin works directly in their favor? In other words, if there is no Putin, the communists might have a chance of taking power in Russia again. And they would be a much more difficult political force for the West to contend with than Putin. This is something that those running the war party in Washington, D.C., and the NATO militarists in Brussels, who claim that Putin is a threat to liberal democracy in the world, need to think about. If, of course, they still have the ability to think and are not completely under the sway of negative emotions such as envy, jealousy, and the feelings of inferiority. Dear friends, this is all for today. Thank you for your time. Be cool and stay cool until the next edition of the Russian Newspapers Monitor.